Detective Dick Ruffalo parked the squad car at the curb of Maple Street. The spring Monday morning seemed too bright for what he was about to see. The modest one-story house with its faded blue shutters didn't stand out among the dozens of similar buildings in this working-class Oakville neighborhood, except for the police tape and 2 patrol cars at the entrance. Ruffalo. He introduced himself briefly to the officer at the door. "What do we have here?" "Female, 51 years old," the young patrolman replied, checking his notebook. "Nancy Parker, found by a neighbor around 8 o'clock this morning. Apparently strangled. CSU's already working on it." Ruffalo nodded and stepped over the threshold, pulling on latex gloves. Inside the house looked cozier than outside. Clean curtains, family photos on the walls, a knitted plaid on the couch, and in the middle of this ordinary, almost postcard-like interior was a body. Nancy Parker was lying on the living room floor, her eyes wide open, her neck showing the characteristic marks of strangulation. She was dressed in a house robe, her graying blonde hair strewn across the carpet. The forensic scientist was bent over the body, performing an initial examination. "Hi, Dick." The examiner said hello without taking a break from his work. "Time of death tentatively between 22 and 24 hours last night. Manual strangulation, minimal signs of struggle. The attack was probably sudden, or the victim knew his attacker and wasn't expecting aggression." Ruffalo looked around slowly. On the coffee table was a laptop with a Facebook page open. The screen was still glowing. Apparently one of the first arriving officers had moved the mouse. Smiling from the screen was the same Nancy, but alive and happy, in a white dress, next to a stout man in his 40s in a strict dark suit. Wedding photo. The date of publication was yesterday evening, 21 hours and 30 minutes. "Husband?" Ruffalo asked the CSI who was taking pictures of the room. "The paperwork says Gregory Parker, 38 years old," the female CSI replied. "Truck driver. Car's missing. No answer on his cell phone." Ruffalo frowned. 90% of the time, the killer is a loved one, and by the looks of it, this case is no exception. "Is there any sign of forced entry in the house?" he asked, looking around the room. "No," the forensic scientist replied. "But look at the mess." Ruffalo only now noticed that while the house was neat, the living room was chaotic. An overturned floor lamp, books thrown off the shelf, a broken vase, everything pointed to a quarrel, a fight. "Neighbors hear anything?" "Yeah, uniforms have already canvassed the neighborhood. Couple across the street reported a loud argument at about 2:22. Husband wanted to call the cops, but the wife talked him out of it, said it wasn't the Parkers' first time." The detective went to the window. Across the street, was the same modest house, on the porch of which stood an elderly couple, curiously watching what was happening. "I'll go and talk to them," he said, "and then we'll have to find the husband, put out an APB on him in the car." 5 minutes later, Ruffalo was sitting in the living room of the house across the street. The Thompson couple, Robert and Mary, both in their 70s, had lived on this street for over 30 years and knew everything about everyone. They were married only 3 weeks ago, Mary Thompson told me as she poured tea. It was Nancy's 3rd marriage. Poor thing, she'd always been so anxious to be married. "And Greg? What can you say about him?" The couple looked at each other. "He moved in with her about 6 months ago," Robert began cautiously. "Young for her, of course, but he seems to be a hard worker, a trucker, on the road a lot." "But?" Ruffalo sensed an understatement. "But he has a nasty temper," Mary said firmly. "Rude and jealous. I've heard him yell at Nancy many times over nothing. Dinner's not on time, or her dress is too open, or she's been talking to some man." "Did you hear the quarrel last night?" "Yes," Robert nodded. "It started about 10 o'clock. First loud voices, then a shout, something fell or broke. I wanted to call the police, but I told them it was none of our business." Mary sighed. "I thought they'd make up, like they always do. I wish I'd known." "It wasn't your fault," Ruffalo said softly. "You couldn't have foreseen it. What about the truck? When was the last time you saw it?" "Last night it was parked here." Robert pointed to the spot in front of the house. "Not this morning. I think Greg left last night." Thanking the neighbors, Ruffalo returned to the scene of the crime. Nancy's body had already been taken away, but the forensic team was still working. The detective took another look at the wedding photo on the laptop screen. Judging by the number of likes and comments, the news of the wedding had caused a strong reaction from Nancy's friends. Everyone congratulated, admired, wished happiness. "Did you find anything interesting?" asked the criminalist, noticing his attention to the computer. "Maybe," Ruffalo replied thoughtfully. "This is the last thing she did online before she died. Uploaded a wedding photo. I wonder if that could have been the trigger for the fight." Ruffalo's cell phone rang. It was the lieutenant from the precinct. "Dick, we contacted the supermarket where the victim worked. Her immediate supervisor, one David Higgins, is waiting for you there. He says he can give you some important information about the couple." The fresh produce supermarket was a 15-minute drive from the Parkers' house. A typical neighborhood store, not too big, but clean and well organized. David Higgins, a man in his 50s with balding hair and sad eyes, was waiting for Ruffalo in his cramped office behind the checkout area. "I can't believe it," he said, as soon as the detective introduced himself. "Nancy, she was the soul of the group. Everybody loved her." "How long had she worked here?" Ruffalo asked, sitting down in the chair across from her. "Almost 15 years. Started as a cashier, worked her way up to shift manager, responsible, punctual, always had a smile for the customers." "And her husband? Did you know him?" Higgins's face tensed up. "I did. He'd sometimes pick her up after his shift. To be honest, I didn't like him right away. Too, possessive or something. Always checking to see who she was talking to, looking at her phone." "Did you know they were married?" "Yeah. Nancy said they got married 3 weeks ago. Quietly, they just did. And then they had a photo shoot this weekend, and she showed me the pictures. She was really excited about it." Higgins was silent, staring at the table. "Mr. Higgins," Ruffalo began cautiously, "did you have a special relationship with Nancy?" Higgins flinched, then slowly raised his eyes. "We were friends," he said quietly. "Good friends. Yes, I had feelings for her, but she only saw me as a friend, and I respected that." "Greg knew about your friendship?" "Yes, and he hated me for it. He once told me outright to stay away from his woman. This was before they were married, like 3 months ago. I tried to talk to Nancy, express my concerns, but she said she loved him, that he was just passionate, cared about her." "When was the last time you saw Nancy?" "Saturday, the day before yesterday. She was working the morning shift, was happy, showing off her new wedding photos, saying she'd post the best one on Facebook tonight." Higgins shook his head. "She loved social media, always sharing everything. Photos, news, thoughts. Greg hated it, believed privacy should remain private. They often fought about it." Ruffalo nodded, making notes in his notebook. "Do you have any idea where Greg might be? Friends, relatives, favorite places?" "I don't know. He hasn't been very forthcoming about his life. All I know is that he had a brother somewhere in Maryland, and that he used to hang out at Joe's bar after his flights." Ruffalo thanked Higgins and was about to leave when he suddenly added, "Detective, there's something else. It's probably not important, but, Nancy seemed troubled lately. Like there's something weighing on her. I'd ask, but she'd dismiss it, say it was nothing. But I worked with her for 15 years. I knew when she was lying." Back at the station, Ruffalo organized a search operation. Alerts on Greg Parker and his truck were sent out to all patrol cars, traffic cameras were checked, cell phones were tracked. After reviewing the raw data, the detective became more and more convinced that he was dealing with a classic case of domestic violence that had ended in tragedy. Around 5 p.m., Officer Martinez stopped by Ruffalo's office. "We have information from the cell phone carrier," she said. "Parker's phone last connected to the tower at 23:30 yesterday, about 5 kilometers east of town, on Route 286. Then it was turned off." "So he was heading east," Ruffalo said thoughtfully. "Probably to his brother's in Maryland. Contact the police there, have them check it out." As the information accumulated, the picture of what had happened became clearer and clearer. Nancy Parker, twice divorced, meets Greg, a truck driver. The relationship develops quickly. He moves in with her. They marry. But the marriage is marred by constant arguments, jealousy, and controlling behavior on the part of her husband. And then last night, Nancy posts their wedding photo on Facebook against her husband's wishes. The fight, the effect, the murder, the flight. One question remained. What was it about this photo that made Greg so angry? Was it just the violation of his demand to keep his private life private? Or was it something else? Tuesday morning greeted Detective Dick Ruffalo with a stack of reports on his desk. His coffee was getting cold as he scrutinized the documents from various sources. First in the folder was a complete dossier on Greg Parker, and it contained a surprise. "Look at this," Ruffalo muttered, raising his eyes to his partner, Officer Ellen Martinez, who had just entered the office. "Our fugitive has a criminal record. 3 years ago, assault causing moderate bodily harm at a roadhouse bar. Got off with probation and community service." Martinez sat on the edge of the table. No surprise there. According to neighbors and co-workers, he has an explosive temper. What was he angry about that time? According to the case file, someone was allegedly flirting with his then-girlfriend. Ruffalo turned the page. Broke the guy's nose and 2 ribs. Police report says the victim just asked Parker's girlfriend what time it was. Pathological jealousy, Martinez nodded. It fits with what we know about his relationship with Nancy Parker. Ruffalo leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen thoughtfully on the desk. Curious if Nancy knew about his criminal record before she married him? The victim's sister would be here in an hour? I'd have to ask. What about the search, by the way? No luck so far, Martinez sighed. The last traffic signal recorded his truck at 2 o'clock yesterday morning on Highway 95, heading south, but nothing since then. Probably turned onto a side road. What about the brother in Maryland? State police have his house under surveillance, but so far Greg hasn't been there. They interviewed the brother. He claims he hasn't seen Greg in months and doesn't know where he might be. Ruffalo nodded and continued going through the documents. Next was a report on the couple's financial situation. Nancy Parker lived modestly but steadily. Supermarket manager's salary, small savings, house almost paid off. Greg, on the other hand, had apparently received no income for the past 3 months, although his truck driver's salary had been deposited regularly. Interesting, the detective muttered, noting the dates in his notebook. The ringing of the telephone interrupted his musings. Ruffalo, he introduced himself briefly. Detective, this is the duty officer. It's Linda Baker, the victim's sister. Show her in. A few minutes later, a 47-year-old woman with the same shade of blonde hair as the dead Nancy entered the office. Her eyes were red with tears, but she held herself upright and dignified. Miss Baker. Ruffalo rose to shake her hand. I'm sorry for your loss. Have a seat. I realize this is difficult for you, but we need to ask some questions to find your son-in-law. I never thought of him as my son-in-law, Linda replied sharply as she lowered herself into a chair. I was against this marriage from the beginning. Ruffalo glanced at Martinez. It looks like this conversation is going to be productive. Why? What didn't you like about Greg? Linda took a deep breath as if gathering her thoughts. Everything. He came out of nowhere 6 months ago. Nancy met him at the supermarket where she worked. He was buying something. They got to talking. 2 weeks later, he was living in her house. Linda shook her head. Nancy had always been romantic, gullible. After 2 failed marriages, she still believed in fairy tales. And here was a young man, attentive, caring, at first. What changed then? He showed his true colors. He began to control her every move, who she talked to, where she went, what she wore. He was especially pissed off that Nancy was using social media. She loved to share photos, stories from her life. She had lots of friends online. She kept a cooking blog. And Greg was against it? Absolutely. Said it wasn't safe, that privacy should remain private. But I think really, he was just afraid that one of her online friends would steal her away. Linda grinned bitterly, as if Nancy could have preferred anyone over that hand truck. Did you know about his criminal record? Ruffalo asked, watching for a reaction. Linda flinched. No, what criminal record? 3 years ago, Greg beat up a man in a bar out of jealousy. Got probation. Oh my God, Linda whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. I didn't know, and I'm sure Nancy didn't know either. She would have told me. How often did you talk to your sister? I used to talk to her almost every day, not so much the last few months. Greg didn't like her talking to me. He thought I was turning her against him. Linda swallowed. He was right. I did try to open her eyes, but she wouldn't listen. Said I was just jealous of her happiness. When did they decide to get married? It was out of the blue. 3 weeks ago, Nancy called me after the fact. Said they just went out and got married. No ceremony, no guests, not even rings. Linda shook her head. I was shocked. Asked me why the rush if she was pregnant. But Nancy just laughed and said they just didn't want to wait. But then they did take the wedding photos? Ruffalo clarified. Yes, this weekend Nancy called on Saturday. She was very happy. She said Greg had finally agreed to a professional shoot, and they spent the whole day taking pictures in the park in the studio. She rented a dress, he wore a suit. The pictures weren't due until a week later, but the photographer sent them some previews. And Nancy, Linda's voice trembled. Nancy said she was finally going to put one picture on Facebook to let her friends know about the wedding. Greg was against it? Of course, but this time she insisted. She told me it was just a picture, that all her friends were posting wedding pictures, and she had the right to do it. Linda stopped talking, tears rolling down her cheeks. I didn't think it would cost her her life. Ruffalo gave her time to calm down, handed her a box of tissues. When Linda regained her composure, he asked another question. Have you noticed anything strange about Greg's behavior lately? Maybe Nancy said he was nervous, hiding something? Linda thought for a moment. Now that you ask, yes. About a month ago, Nancy and I did meet for coffee. Greg was supposed to be on a flight. She mentioned that he'd gotten kind of jumpy, often whispering on the phone when he went into the other room. I suggested then that he might have another woman. Linda lowered her eyes. Nancy got very angry with me for saying that. Said I always think the worst of people and left. We didn't speak for days after that. After thanking Linda and promising to keep her informed of the investigation, Ruffalo returned to his notes. What do you think? Martinez asked when the victim's sister left. I think we need to see if Greg's been traveling for the last 3 months and find out why the deposits to his account stopped. An hour later, the detective was talking to the manager of the transcontinental transportation company where Greg worked. Parker? The full-bodied man in the unbuttoned shirt asked, looking up documents on his computer. Oh yeah. He was a good driver, reliable. Too bad I had to fire him. Fired? When did this happen? Ruffalo was concerned. About 3 months ago. You can check with Human Resources for the exact date. For what reason? The manager grimaced. Alcohol. Caught him on a pre-flight spot check. And then they found evidence that he'd been drinking and driving before. We can't accept that. The risks are too high. One drunk driver can ruin an entire company's reputation. So Greg hasn't worked anywhere in the last 3 months? Not with us, that's for sure. Maybe he took a job with another company. Not easy with a stain on his record, though. After leaving the transportation company's office, Ruffalo decided to follow up on another lead. Joe's Bar, mentioned by David Higgins, was located on the outskirts of the city, not far from the highway, a convenient place for truckers. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the bar was almost empty, just a couple of regulars at a far table and a lone bartender wiping glasses. What can I get you? He asked when Ruffalo took a seat at the bar. Information, the detective replied, showing his badge. Do you know this man? He showed a picture of Greg. The bartender squinted at the picture. Of course I do. Greg Parker, frequent visitor. How often was he here? Almost every day for the last few months. Usually came in around 5 o'clock, left around 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Did he drink a lot? Quite a lot, the bartender answered evasively. But not violent, if that's what you mean. I sat quietly, drank beer, sometimes whiskey, sometimes talked to other customers, but more often alone. When was the last time you saw him? Yesterday, the bartender answered without hesitation. He was here from 5 to 8 or so, drank more than usual, seemed nervous. Ruffalo stepped forward. Did he say anything? Maybe mention where he was going? No, but he got some kind of call that sent him into a frenzy. He stormed out of the bar without even paying. I tried to chase him down, but then I gave up. He's a regular, he'll give it back next time. Did you hear what the conversation was about? No, he went outside to talk, but when he came back to get his jacket, he had this, scary. I've never seen him like that. This was around 8 p.m.? Yeah, around that time. Do you know if he'd been working anywhere in the last few months? Ruffalo asked. He's a trucker, he must be on the road. The bartender grinned. What kind of trips? He got kicked out of Transcontinental for drinking. I thought his wife knew. Guess not, Ruffalo replied thoughtfully. How did he pay his bills if he wasn't working? I don't know. Probably lived on his wife's money. Although, the bartender hesitated. What? Well, the last couple weeks he seemed to have some money. He even took everyone out a couple times. Said he was going to be rich soon. We figured he got a new job. After leaving the bar, Ruffalo called Martinez to see if Nancy Parker had recently changed her will. The picture was slowly taking shape. Greg had lost his job because of his drinking problem, but he was hiding it from his wife, pretending to go on trips while actually spending time at the bar. At the same time, he continued to be maniacally jealous of Nancy, forbade her to socialize with people and post pictures on social networks. The question remained, what exactly was the final straw? What was it about that wedding photo that made Greg so angry? The answer came unexpectedly. Returning to the car, Ruffalo noticed a young woman who was scrutinizing the police car. When she noticed the detective, she hesitantly walked toward him. "Excuse me," she said. "You're a cop, aren't you? Are you looking for Greg Parker?" Ruffalo became alert. "Yeah? And you are?" "My name is Amber Collins. Greg and I met a while back. I saw on the news, and they showed his picture." She stopped talking, shuffling from foot to foot. "Miss Collins," Ruffalo said softly, "if you have any information, it's very important that you share it." Amber nodded. "I was near their house last week. I wanted to talk to his wife." "Why?" "To warn her." Amber took a deep breath. "Greg, he's not who he says he is. We dated 6 months ago, and it was serious. Then he just disappeared. And then a month ago, I happened to see him in town with another woman, Nancy. I tried to talk to him, but he pretended he didn't know me. And then later he called and threatened to keep me away." "Did you tell Nancy?" "No, I didn't have time. I went to their house, but Greg was there and I got scared. I decided to come back another day, and now it was too late." Amber lowered her head. "If only I'd had the courage to talk to her sooner." "It's not your fault," Ruffalo said firmly. "But right now your information could help us find the killer. Tell us everything you know about Greg." "We met at Joe's bar about 8 months ago. He bought me a drink, we got to talking. He was charming, attentive, introduced himself as a truck driver, said he traveled a lot. We started seeing each other, but gradually, I noticed strange things. He never invited me to his house. We always met at my place or in a motel. He often disappeared for a few days, explaining it with flights, and he was very jealous. He made a scene if I talked to other men, checked my phone. How did it end? One day he just stopped answering his phone. I was worried. I even called hospitals, but there was no sign of him. And then, like I said, I met him with Nancy. I realized he'd just left me for her." Amber paused. "When I saw his picture on the news, found out his wife had been murdered, I couldn't believe it. But at the same time, I could. There was always something scary about him, underneath all that charm." Ruffalo made notes in his notebook. "Miss Collins, you mentioned that Greg threatened you when you tried to contact him after the meeting. What exactly did he say? That if I didn't get out of his life, he'd make me sorry. That he finally had a chance at a normal life, and he wouldn't let me ruin it." Amber flinched. His voice, it sounded truly dangerous. "Did you know he had an assault conviction?" "No." Amber went pale. God, if I had known. After talking to Amber, Ruffalo returned to the station with a new understanding of the situation. Greg Parker was leading a double life, dating different women, possibly at the same time, lost his job to alcohol, hid his past, and suddenly married Nancy, a woman older than him, with her own house and a stable job. At the station, he got a call from Martinez. "Dick, there's an update on the will. Nancy really did change it 2 weeks ago, right after the wedding. Greg is now the sole heir. The house, the savings, the insurance, it's all his." "The motive becomes even clearer," Ruffalo muttered. "But the sequence of events doesn't add up. If he married her for the money, why kill her so soon? He could have waited so as not to arouse suspicion." "Maybe something made him act faster than planned," Martinez suggested. "Some kind of trigger?" "The photograph," Ruffalo said slowly. Everything revolves around this wedding photo on Facebook. We need to take a closer look at it." Returning to his computer, the detective opened Nancy Parker's page. The photo was still there, the happy couple against an arch of flowers. The comments were multiplying, now with expressions of condolence and shock. Ruffalo stared at Greg's face in the photo. Something in that photograph could have been the trigger for murder. What it was, he had yet to find out. The call came at 3 o'clock in the morning. Dick Ruffalo, dozing in his office chair, flinched and grabbed the phone. "Ruffalo," he answered hoarsely, trying to focus his eyes on the face of his wristwatch. "Detective, this is Duty Officer Brooks of the Chester County Sheriff's Department, Pennsylvania. We've apprehended the suspect you're looking for, Gregory Parker." Ruffalo was instantly awake, straightening up in his chair. "Where'd you pick him up?" "At a gas station off Highway 76. The gas station attendant I.D. quote, D him from the photo in the APB. Parker was filling up his truck and buying food. Didn't put up a fight when he was apprehended. Nice work." Ruffalo was already pulling on his jacket. "Did he say anything?" "Not much. He asked for a lawyer. He's in the Westville Detention Center right now." "I'm on my way. I'll be there in about 4 hours. Don't start the interview without me." After hanging up the phone, Ruffalo quickly gathered all the necessary case files into a folder and left the station. The night road was almost empty, allowing him to cover the distance to Pennsylvania faster than he had hoped. The Sheriff's Department building in Westville was typical of small towns, a brick 2-story structure with a flag on the porch. Ruffalo introduced himself to the officer on duty and was escorted to an interview room where Sheriff Taylor, a heavy-set man with a bushy mustache, was already seated. "How is he?" Ruffalo asked after an exchange of greetings. "Calm. Too calm, if you ask me," the sheriff replied. "We've provided him with a lawyer, but he's hardly consulted him." "Sit silent, staring at the wall. I want to talk to him." Greg Parker looked different than he did in his wedding picture. Stubble, red eyes, wrinkled clothes. He was sitting at a table in the interrogation room with his hands folded in front of him. When Ruffalo entered, Greg looked up. Blank. Lifeless. "Mr. Parker, I'm Detective Dick Ruffalo of the Oakville Police Department," he introduced himself, sitting down across from him. "Do you know why you were detained?" Greg nodded, but said nothing. The young court-appointed attorney sitting next to him was clearly inexperienced and a little nervous. "My client will not answer questions without specific charges," the lawyer said. "Your client is wanted on suspicion of the murder of his wife, Nancy Parker," Ruffalo said calmly, not taking his eyes off Greg. "The body was discovered in their home on Monday morning. Forensic examination determined that death occurred on Sunday evening, between 22 and 24 hours, as a result of strangulation. After that, Mr. Parker left town in his truck." "It's all circumstantial evidence," objected counsel. "You have no proof. We have witnesses who heard a commotion at the Parker home at about 10 o'clock on Sunday night." Ruffalo interrupted him. "We have surveillance footage showing that Mr. Parker's truck left town shortly after the time of the alleged murder. We have a motive, an amended will leaving all of Nancy's assets to her new husband. And we have a history of Mr. Parker's violent behavior, including a previous assault conviction." Greg looked up, showing emotion for the first time. Surprise. "You know about it," Ruffalo stated. "It was a long time ago." Greg spoke for the first time. His voice was hoarse, as if he'd been silent for a long time. "It had nothing to do with what happened to Nancy." "What happened to Nancy, Mr. Parker?" Ruffalo asked softly. The lawyer put a hand on Greg's shoulder, warning him, but he shook it off. "I didn't kill her," he said, looking directly at the detective. "I mean, I didn't mean to, didn't plan it. It just out of control." "Mr. Parker, I advise you to remain silent," the lawyer intervened. "Anything you say?" "Shut up!" Greg shouted, and the lawyer recoiled. "What difference does it make now? It's over. It's over." Ruffalo slowly took out a notebook and pen and laid them in front of him. "Tell me what happened Sunday night," he suggested in a calm, almost friendly tone. Greg was silent for a long time, staring at the table. Then he took a deep breath. "I was at Joe's bar, like Peel usually does, watching baseball on TV. Then Nancy called and said she'd posted our wedding picture on Facebook. I was pissed. I'd always told her I didn't want our pictures on the internet, She promised to wait until I was ready. Greg shook his head, but that wasn't the worst part. About an hour later, I got a call from Amber. Amber Collins? Ruffalo clarified. Your ex-girlfriend? Greg raised his eyebrows in surprise. You know about her too? Yeah, Amber. She saw a picture in some mutual acquaintance's feed. Said she was sure she'd tell Nancy the truth about me now, that I'd been seeing her just before I met Nancy, that I'd dumped her without explanation. Greg ran his hand over his face. I panicked. I drove home. I wanted to explain to Nancy somehow, to warn her. But it was too late, Ruffalo suggested. Yeah, Greg lowered his head. Amber had already called her. When I got back, Nancy was furious, screamed that I'd been lying to her the whole time, that I'd been using her. Said she now understood why I didn't want to go public, afraid someone from my past would recognize me. So what happened next? I tried to explain that Amber was just jealous, that my relationship with her was long over. But Nancy didn't believe me. She started saying she'd call my company, find out if I was really on flights when I said I was leaving. Greg swallowed. Then I confessed that I'd lost my job 3 months ago. Because of the alcohol. Didn't want her to know I'm a loser, can't even hold down a job. And all those months, when you were supposedly on flights, you were actually sitting in Joe's bar? Ruffalo asked. Yes, Greg nodded. Sometimes I'd just drive around town. Sometimes I'd really go away for a couple days, stay in a motel, pretend everything was normal. What kind of money did you live on? Savings at first. Then, Greg hesitated. Then I borrowed from friends. Borrowed money. I planned to get a new job, but it didn't work out. And then when we got married and Nancy changed her will. He stopped, realizing how that sounded. You proposed marriage knowing her financial situation? Ruffalo asked. No, Greg pounded his fist on the table. I mean, yes, I knew she had a house, a stable job, but I loved her. For real. The marriage proposal was spontaneous. We had a fight, then we made up, and I just said, and she said yes. We went straight out and got married. I didn't even think about the will. She suggested we change it. Said I was her family now. Ruffalo was making notes in his notebook. Let's go back to Sunday night. What happened after you confessed to losing your job? Greg's face darkened. She was shocked. She couldn't believe it at first. Then she got more angry. She said I was a cheater, an Alfonso, that I'd used her. Greg's voice shook. And then she said she was going to tell everyone. That she'd put a post on Facebook about what a liar and a loser I was. That all her friends would know I was living off her money. That I'd lost my job for drinking. She picked up her laptop, started typing. Greg fell silent, staring at one point. His hands on the table began to tremble. And that's when you jumped her, Ruffalo said quietly. I don't remember, Greg whispered. I swear I don't remember. It's like a blur before my eyes. I remember screaming for her to stop, that she couldn't write that it would destroy me. I remember trying to take her laptop away from her. And then you woke up and Nancy was dead, Ruffalo finished for him. Greg nodded slowly, tears rolling down his cheeks. I didn't mean to. I swear to God, I didn't mean to kill her. I panicked, got in the truck and just drove away. Thought maybe I'd crash on the way. But I didn't even have the guts to do that. Ruffalo wrote down the statement and pushed the notebook toward Greg. These are your words. Read it and sign it if it's correct. Greg ran his eyes over the text and signed with a shaky hand. What happens now? He asked without looking at the detective. You'll be transferred to the Oakville County Jail. There will be a trial. Given your confession and the circumstances, the charge will probably be manslaughter or vehicular manslaughter, rather than first-degree premeditated murder. But that's for the prosecutor and the jury to decide. As Greg was led away, Sheriff Taylor offered Ruffalo coffee in his office. What do you think? The sheriff asked, pouring the steaming beverage into 2 mugs. Is he telling the truth? Ruffalo sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Mostly, yes. The story fits with what we know. He did lose his job to alcohol. Really hid it from his wife. The wedding photo really was the trigger. The ex-girlfriend saw it and called Nancy. But there's something he's not telling us. Ruffalo rubbed his chin. His version of a spontaneous marriage proposal sounds bogus. And the fact that he changed his will right after the wedding. Too convenient. Maybe he hadn't planned to kill Nancy so soon, but I'm pretty sure marriage was part of the plan. Back in Oakville, Ruffalo held a press conference announcing the capture and confession of the suspect, then drove home to finally get some sleep after 2 days on his feet. But before going to bed, he went over the case file one more time. The story of Greg Parker was painfully typical. A man who has not coped with the difficulties of life, starts drinking, loses his job, lies to loved ones, trying to save face. And when the deception is revealed, breaks down in a fit of rage and commits the irreparable, all because of one photo on a social network. Ruffalo opened Nancy's page on his phone. The photo was still there, the happy bride with shining eyes and her frowning groom, unaware that this photo would be the beginning of the end. Some people put their lives on the internet to share joy or gain approval, while others hide from publicity for fear that the past will catch up with them. In Greg and Nancy's case, the clash of these approaches led to tragedy. 2 weeks later, Greg Parker was formally charged with second-degree murder. He pleaded guilty. The court sentenced him to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 10 years. Linda Baker, Nancy's sister, held a modest funeral. Supermarket co-workers, neighbors, and few relatives gathered at the cemetery. Ruffalo came too. He always thought it was important to see victims off on their last journey, even if the investigation had already been completed. After the ceremony, David Higgins, a friend and colleague of Nancy's, approached him. "Thank you for finding him," he said, shaking the detective's hand. "And thanks for coming in today." "It's my job," Ruffalo replied simply. "You know," Higgins said thoughtfully, looking at the fresh grave, "Nancy was always striving for happiness. 3 marriages, endless attempts to find the one, and all for what?" He shook his head. "Sometimes I think she'd be alive if she'd just learned to be happy on her own." "Or if she hadn't met Greg," Ruffalo said. "Or if she hadn't posted that damn picture," Higgins added bitterly. "It's ironic, sharing your happiness with the world all your life and then getting killed for it." They stood in silence for a while longer, and then went their separate ways, each to his own car, each to his own life. The Nancy Parker case was closed. Another tragedy in the long list of those that begin with love and end in death. Another reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters don't live in the dark, but right next to us, smiling from family photos and sharing our shelter. Getting into the car, Ruffalo took one last look at the cemetery. The spring wind swayed the flowers on the fresh graves. Life went on, with all its joys and sorrows, love and hate, truth and lies. And the work of Detective Dick Ruffalo never ended, because there will always be someone who will cross the line, who will not hold back his anger, whose secrets will come out. Tomorrow there will be a new case, new victims, new mysteries. But today, if only for a short time, it was possible to just be quiet and think about the woman who wanted happiness so badly that she didn't notice the danger around her. A woman who paid with her life for the right to share her joy with the world.